The Civil War, or the American Civil War, has been taught as the bloodiest fight between the northern and southern states during Lincoln's presidency. In more detail, the Northern Union and the Southern Confederacy of seceded states brewed over an increasing animosity behind clashing ideals and conduct until, inevitably, there was no other choice than to take up arms against each other. While the Civil War is considered to have started on April 12, 1861 formally, we must trace back to just how primed the two sides had been for this conflict to rise. While the 1820 Missouri Compromise had not been the start of the dissonance between the states, the establishment of its latitude had further allowed the South and North to diverge. There was now a clearly directionally drawn distinction of a slave state and a free state as proclaimed. And so the major focal point of their contention becomes clearer as well. Slavery, specifically. The opposing sides of slavery as a given right to own, and slavery as an act of sin. To start, the institution of slavery played a huge role in the southern states economically and socially. The soil and climate of the North encouraged the development in factory manufacturing and other industrial development that made less use of slaves. Meanwhile, the soil and climate of the South lent well to the hotter conditions of large plantations to be worked with slave labor. Nearly 4 million slaves resided in the North in 1860. The cotton crop became such a vital component to the economic scene of the South. Socially, the ideal of owning a slave became a signal for prestige and status among slave owners, and the hierarchy of the ideal pervaded the class ladder in such a way that even those who did not own anyone supported the concept. It allowed slave owners and any prospective access to indulge in public legal power play and dominance, to be better in excellence and prominence. On the other side, the Northerners held above all else the importance of freedom and their constitutional right, but also understood, with the population of slaves so high, the economic effect of competition would occur if slavery ceased and they moved north. Regardless, talks of abolition of slavery did spread, and some of it made headway toward the South. A third side to the people, slaves understandably, did not wish to live under such conditions, no matter how justified the Southerners claimed and wrote of mercy and enlightenment they provided. And some white sympathizers turned into conspirators of slave revolts, and after several have caused the South to generally be more high-keyed to provocation and violence, armed with guarded, rising apprehension. This was a leading factor into the shutdown of pro-abolition through legislation and actively turning away attention should violence occur onto any who would speak. These limitations for the emancipation of slaves did not sway any notable moral ground for the North until a few key figures, in their martyrdom, brought attention to the threat to constitutional rights that the South was enacting. The death of minister and printer Elijah Lovejoy was one, the first known white man to die who supported abolitionists in his willingness to print their words and to bring attention to the South's willingness to shut out the freedom of press. The death of abolitionist John Brown, with his dying speech, brought attention to the first white man to die for slaves in unequivocal desire for their freedom. It is then that the North began to see slavery as a mechanism of sin against the rights of man, and to continue even in passivity would be a violation of constitutional rights, as the South has proven their willingness to bend as they need to keep their slaves. They would maintain this lack of freedom. The South, in their grown animosity toward their authority of person being challenged and their paranoia of losing their version of independence, and not recognizing slaves as within their stated realm of independence, could not yield. The North, in their descent toward the South's continual evil of violence and violation, were more than willing to volunteer to fight once the South inevitably fired upon Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, in deliberate lack of national recognition of the federal government for failing to protect the property of the South.